decades, hundreds of ships have traversed the waters of the St. Lawrence River, transporting cargo and passengers up and down, and serving as the gateway to North America's Great Lakes from the North Atlantic Ocean. It has been 65 years since the opening of the St. Lawrence Seaway, so let's go back and take a look at the timeline of this magnificent waterway. Each of the locks on the Seaway, some well-known and nearly forgotten landmarks and cities on the Seaway, and even some shipwrecks in the area. So join me today as we discover the history of the St. Lawrence Seaway. Even before its official opening in 1959, the waterway had been preceded by a series of canal locks built as early as the second half of the 19th century. It had been used by ocean liners and various cargo ships for decades, traveling to Quebec City and Montreal, although the older locks on the Seaway could not handle many vessels of that time, and could only handle ships that were about 260 feet in length, meaning that many ships built on the Great Lakes could not reach the Atlantic Ocean, and many ships on the North Atlantic couldn't reach the Great Lakes. But this was also true for Lake Ontario. The Welland Ship Canal, which allows ships to sail between Lake Erie and Lake Ontario, had similar limitations. In other words, many Lakers only traveled as far as Lake Erie. This was until a few decades later, in the 1930s, when the Welland Ship Canal was restored, 100 years after construction in the 1830s, and a fourth lock was completed. Then, larger ships could traverse the Welland Canal and reach Lake Ontario. However, the St. Lawrence Seaway's locks still couldn't handle many ships of that time until 1954, when the area began constructing a series of larger locks for larger ships. Compared to the previous locks, which could only handle ships with a maximum length of 260 feet, these new locks could handle vessels up to 730 feet in length and 75 feet wide. Almost immediately, Great Lakes shipping companies began producing ships that would be able to travel through the locks on the Seaway and Welland Canal. Many of these ships are Seaway Max vessels, which means that they are the maximum, or within a few feet of the maximum size they can be to fit through the locks. One of those ships was the infamous Edmund Fitzgerald. She was designed to be the biggest vessel on the Great Lakes, while also being within a foot of the maximum size to fit through both the Welland Canal and St. Lawrence Seaway. As of 2024, the St. Lawrence Seaway has a total of 15 locks, and the Welland Canal has a total of 8 locks. And both waterways can handle ships up to 740 feet in length and 78 feet in width. Every year, many types of vessels navigate the St. Lawrence Seaway, heading downbound from the Great Lakes or upbound from the Atlantic Ocean. When the Seaway opened in 1959, the Royal Yacht Britannia sailed up the St. Lawrence Seaway to the Great Lakes, where she docked in Chicago Harbor. The area serves as the gateway to the Great Lakes, and is arguably one of the best places in the world where you can see these massive vessels up close. It is among the busiest waterways in the world, but like any good waterway, it has its own dangers. St. Lawrence is known for generating thick patches of fog. Fog is common on the river in late spring and early summer, as the warm, moist air from the mainland converges over the freezing river, making it common for vessels to experience fog in certain times of the year, though fog on the St. Lawrence can be deadly. One famous example was the ocean liner Empress of Ireland, a Scottish-built ship designed to sail from Liverpool, England to Quebec City, whereas other ships sailed from Liverpool to Boston or New York City. On May 28, 1914, 8 years after entering service, the Empress departed Quebec City with 1,477 people on board, bound for Liverpool. However, before she even reached the mouth of the St. Lawrence River, she encountered a fog bank off Father's Point, and at that same time, another ship, the boat carrier Storyblocks, was sailing up the river bound for Montreal. But here's the thing. The bow of the Storyblocks was heavily reinforced to protect her from the ice during winter crossings, so if she were to ram any ship in fog, that ship that she hit would be sunk in minutes. Early that next morning, the crew of the Empress saw the lights of the Storyblocks when they were about 8 miles apart. But as it just so happens, that blanket of fog had moved in, and the lights of the Storyblocks had become invisible to the crew of the Empress. Shortly afterward, the Empress came to a stop where she would sit idle until the fog cleared, until a light was seen off the starboard side. It was the Storyblocks coming right toward the Empress. The north side rammed the Empress dead center, and allowing tons of water to enter the ship. Just like the RMS Lusitania and Mauretania, the Empress was equipped with longitudinal bulkheads, small compartments on the side of the ship's actual watertight compartments. These were designed so that if the ship were to be hit from the side, the longitudinal bulkhead would take on water, but it couldn't reach the inner part of the compartment, and sometimes they were actually used as the ship's coal bunkers. While they may be useful in some circumstances, the water managed to fill up the bunker and found its way into the inner compartment, causing the ship to develop a starboard list. The Empress rolled onto her starboard side and sank in less than 15 minutes, taking the lives of 1,012 people on board. The sinking of the Empress of Ireland was catastrophic, although not many people are aware of the tragedy. Today, the wreck sits at the bottom of the St. Lawrence, lying on her starboard side in 130 feet of water, as a tragic piece of maritime history. Though this is not the only danger of the St. Lawrence River. At the mouth of the St. Lawrence River, where it meets the Gulf of St. Lawrence, the river stretches more than 60 miles wide. But as you pass Quebec and Montreal, both sides of the river are only a stone's throw apart, and it becomes more dangerous to shipping. In fact, most ships that come from abroad and travel up the St. Lawrence Seaway can only travel as far as Montreal, because it is just past here that ships encounter the first locks they find if they are traveling towards the Great Lakes. This is where the St. Lawrence River narrows again, and we see the first rapids. The common misconception is that the St. Lawrence River flows from the Gulf of the St. Lawrence to the Great Lakes, likely because the St. Lawrence Seaway is wider at its mouth, but this is just not the case. The St. Lawrence River actually flows from Lake Ontario to the Gulf of St. Lawrence. The reason why this is the case is, Lake Ontario, although it has the lowest elevation out of the 5 Great Lakes, it sits at about 240 feet above sea level. Therefore, it would be impossible for the St. Lawrence River to flow from the Gulf of St. Lawrence. First, let's talk about how these locks work. If you look from above, you'll notice that the lock's gates are shaped in a way that they form a triangle when closed. Why is this? When the locks are being used, often the water level in the lock will be lower than that of the water on the other side of the gate. So if the locks were designed so that when they close they meet at a 180-degree angle, pressure of the water from whatever side has the highest water level will cause the gates to buckle, since there was a higher water level on that side of the gate than on the other side. Whereas if you make it so that the gates meet in a triangular shape, the force of the higher water level will push the two sides of the gate together, making it so that it is sealed tight enough that water won't leak through from the outside of the lock. When a ship goes through the lock and it's heading upriver towards the higher body of water, it slowly moves in, and when it's stopped, the gate is closed. Shortly after, water from the upper part of the lock is transferred into the lock itself via a system of pipes and valves. Sometimes the water level is controlled mechanically with pumps. The sea locks don't use any pumps to change the water level, and they just use gravity to fill and drain the locks. And when the two water levels are even, the gates are opened and the ship continues its trip. But when a ship is heading downriver, the water level in the lock is evened out to the same level as the higher body of water so the ship can sail in. And when the ship is in the lock, the water in the lock is drained into the lower body of water so it matches the water level of the lower body of water. And when the water levels are evened out, the gates are open and the ship is on its way. Going back to the dangers of the St. Lawrence River, Seaway is known for having countless shoals and shallow sections which have claimed hundreds of ships over the past few centuries. One particular ship was the bulk carrier Roy A. Jodrey, a freighter that was traveling upbound on the Seaway on November 21st, 1974, when it struck a shoal near Alexandria Bay, New York. The ship remained afloat for about 4 hours. During that time, it was towed towards the Wellesley Island Coast Guard station, though the attempts to keep the ship afloat failed, when the ship capsized and sank in about 250 feet of water in front of the Coast Guard station. But not just the many shoals and shallows, but the first few hundred miles or so of the river has a bunch of narrows and tight spaces for ships, up until you pass Montreal and Quebec City. The first few hundred miles of the St. Lawrence River is known as the Thousand Islands region, home to many riverside communities and landmarks. Though it is called the Thousand Islands region, the archipelago has a total of 1,864 islands, both large and small. It is a great community and lots of things to see and do while you are in the area. Starting at the area where the St. Lawrence River meets Lake Ontario, you'd already come across the first landmark on the Seaway. The Tibbetts Point Lighthouse, located just outside of the village of Cape Vincent, New York, was built to mark the entrance of the St. Lawrence River and Lake Ontario. The original lighthouse was completed in 1827, and the current structure was completed in 1854. The lighthouse is fitted with a fourth-order Fresnel lens that can be seen up to 16 miles out on Lake Ontario. In 1897, a steam-powered fog signal building was added to the property, though today it is no longer used since the residents of nearby communities such as Wolf Island and Cape Vincent complained that the noise shook their homes. In 1939, the U.S. Coast Guard took over the operation of the lighthouse, and the Keeper's House was used as a Coast Guard station until 1981. It is now a hostel today. Today, the lighthouse is a popular attraction for the Thousand Islands region, drawing thousands of visitors every year. Today, the lighthouse is still in operation, guiding ships in and out of the St. Lawrence River. Just 22 miles downriver from Tibbetts Point, you'll find another historic lighthouse. The Rock Island Lighthouse was erected to mark one of the most dangerous points on the St. Lawrence River, where ships have to traverse some narrows, and the narrows are home to some hazardous shoals. The original lighthouse on the island was constructed in 1847 as the Keeper's House and Light Tower. In 1882, the old building was removed and the lighthouse and Keeper's House were reconstructed as separate buildings. Since the lighthouse was in the middle of the island, it was often difficult to see. After several ships foundered after hitting the shoals near Rock Island, the light was raised slightly, until the current tower was completed in 1903 at the end of a pier. Today, Rock Island is a state park. Visitors can take a ferry to the island and go inside both the Keeper's House and the lighthouse itself. Today, the lighthouse is still in operation, helping ships traverse the narrows of the St. Lawrence River. This next place is within sight of the Rock Island Lighthouse, and you can actually see the lighthouse from it. The Thousand Islands Bridge spans the narrows of the St. Lawrence River between Collins Landing on the mainland and Wellesley Island. Construction on the bridge began in 1937 as a more reliable link between the U.S. and Canada. Previously, the only link between New York State and Ontario in this area was by the ferries that sailed across the river, until the Thousand Islands Bridge was completed in August of 1938, which made the link between both countries a lot more efficient. There are actually two bridges. The bridge that connects the U.S. mainland to Wellesley Island. This is the bridge that ships pass under when sailing through the area. This bridge is just under 1 mile in length and has a 150-foot clearance from the water to the deck of the bridge that allows ships to sail underneath. The Canadian side of the bridge is a little shorter at about a half-mile long, and the clearance from the deck of the bridge to the water is 120 feet. The large ships don't sail onto the Canadian side of the bridge. In total, with both bridges, as well as a truss between the two bridges, the Thousand Islands Bridge, along with the road leading to the other bridges, is 8.5 miles long, and the bridge serves as one of only 3 links between the U.S. and Canada that cross the St. Lawrence River. This next landmark, just a few miles downriver, is a place with an interesting history. Located on Hart Island in Alexandria Bay, New York, Bolt Castle is a well-known landmark and tourist attraction for the Thousand Islands region. The story of Bolt Castle dates back to 1864, when 13-year-old George Bolt came to the United States as a Prussian immigrant by himself. When he entered adulthood, he worked as a hotel manager in New York City, where he managed to gain a lot of wealth off of it. Later, he purchased a small island in Alexandria Bay, New York, in the Thousand Islands region known as Hart Island. Originally, there was a beautiful summer home on that island that George Bolt had built prior for his wife, Louise, and he demolished it to rebuild it on Wellesley Island. Construction of Bolt Castle started in 1900, and George Bolt had several hundred men working on this masterpiece. However, in January of 1904, less than 4 years after construction began, George Bolt's wife, Louise, had passed away at the age of 42, after her health had rapidly declined. After her passing, Bolt ordered the construction of Bolt Castle to be cancelled, informing the workers that his wife had passed away. After her passing, he continued to work as a hotel manager in New York City, until he passed away from a heart attack on December 5, 1916, at the age of 65. And the unfinished Bolt Castle was left abandoned for more than 60 years after that. In 1977, the Thousand Islands Bridge Authority was gifted Bolt Castle and Hart Island, where extensive renovations were made to the building. A few years later, Bolt Castle was opened to the public, where visitors could go inside the buildings on the island and see what the place would have looked like if it had been completed under George Bolt's supervision. Today, visitors can take the Uncle Sam Boat Tours ferry to the island, and I myself have been to the island several times. So next time you're in the Thousand Islands region, make sure that you visit Boldt Castle as well. This next landmark is within sight of Boldt Castle, and yes, it is another lighthouse. The Sunken Rock Lighthouse is a beacon designed to warn ships of a large submerged rock that was extremely hazardous to shipping, and that the lighthouse's foundation is built on. The small man-made island that the lighthouse is on is known as Bush Island, and supports both the lighthouse and the small house on the island. The original lighthouse was constructed in 1847 and refitted in 1855. It stands at 40 feet tall. The lighthouse is still in operation to this day, and is owned by the St. Lawrence Seaway Development Corporation. Unlike the Rock Island and Tibbetts Point lighthouses, you cannot visit the Sunken Rock Lighthouse, but fortunately, you can easily see it from the village of Alexandria Bay and nearby Boldt Castle. There are other lighthouses along the shores of New York State on the St. Lawrence Seaway, but not all of them will be mentioned. Not far down the river, we have another castle. Located on Dark Island, Singer Castle is another famous landmark on the St. Lawrence Seaway. The castle was originally owned by the Byrne family, from when the castle was constructed in 1905 to the mid-1960s. Frederick Byrne was, at the time, the 5th president of the Singer Sewing Machine Company, which became the castle's namesake. During construction, tons of granite was brought over from a nearby quarry to construct the castle between 1903 and 1905. Coincidentally, the same time Boldt Castle was under construction. When it was owned by the Byrne family, it was used as their summer home, and their relatives visited often. Today, Singer Castle is a beautiful attraction and landmark on the St. Lawrence Seaway, and similar to Boldt Castle, you can take a ferry to visit the island. Further downriver, we have the only American port on the St. Lawrence Seaway, the city of Ogdensburg, New York. The port is not very big, as of right now. It can load and unload one ship at a time. However, in November of 2023, the city received a $5 million grant to expand the port of Ogdensburg and allow it to load and unload 2 ships at a time, and work will be completed on that hopefully by 2025. Ogdensburg is also home to another lighthouse, the Ogdensburg Harbor Lighthouse, constructed in 1870 and decommissioned in the 1960s. Today, the lighthouse is privately owned and is the first lighthouse you'll come across on the American side of the St. Lawrence Seaway. Nearby is the Ogdensburg Bridge, another border crossing on the Seaway that links Ogdensburg on the American side and Prescott, Ontario on the Canadian side, similar to the Thousand Islands Bridge. Ogdensburg is definitely a vital destination on the Seaway. Traveling down the river once more, you'll see the first lock on the St. Lawrence Seaway, located near Iroquois, Ontario. The Iroquois lock is not just a lock, but also a gauging station and dam. Construction of the lock began not long after the project was approved in 1954. The site does not have just a lock, it also has a gauging station, as mentioned earlier, and a dam. Part of the dam lies on the Canadian side, while the other half lies on the American side. Continuing down the river once more, you'll find 2 locks that are in the same area. Just outside of the village of Messina, New York, you'll find both the Eisenhower Lock and the Snell Lock. The Eisenhower Lock is accessible to visitors, and has a visitor center that as of March 2024 is undergoing renovations. The Snell Lock, however, is not accessible to the public. The stretch of river between the Eisenhower and Snell Lock is known as the Pool, and there is a road close by where you can see the ships that are sailing through to the other side of the pool. Messina is also home to another border crossing area that links Messina and Cornwall, Ontario, via the International High Level Bridge. Cornwall, Ontario is home to the St. Lawrence Seaway Management Corporation's head office. Both locks were opened around the same time that the St. Lawrence Seaway was completed. Not all of the locks on the Seaway will be mentioned, as there are a lot of them. Messina is not a port, but it is an important location on the St. Lawrence Seaway. And finally, the last locks on the St. Lawrence Seaway that ships heading downbound will encounter are the St. Catherine Lock and the St. Lambert Lock. Both are located in Montreal Harbor and are not too far from each other. And Montreal is actually the starting point on the St. Lawrence Seaway for ships heading upbound. Like most of the locks on the St. Lawrence Seaway, both locks were completed when the Seaway opened in 1959, and they are not too different from the Iroquois and Eisenhower locks. Although, as previously mentioned, they are the first locks ships will encounter if they are heading upbound on the St. Lawrence River. It's important to note that the St. Lawrence Seaway is not the entirety of the St. Lawrence River, and it actually starts at Port Colborne, Ontario, where the Welland Ship Canal meets Lake Erie, and goes through Lake Ontario and ends at Montreal. The rest is just the St. Lawrence River itself. The St. Lawrence Seaway is one of the busiest waterways in the world, and is vital to ship goods from the Great Lakes region to places abroad and vice versa. Though the Seaway is not without problems. There have been numerous shipwrecks on the Seaway that date back hundreds of years, and there have been some incidents on the Seaway as recent as late 2023. In September of 2023, the Canadian cement carrier, Argonaut, ran aground on Cornwall Island in Akwesasne, Ontario. The ship was stranded for several days and left about 15 vessels with nowhere to go. However, another incident happened only a month later. In late October of 2023, only a month after the Argonaut ran aground, the St. Lawrence Seaway had experienced a strike that lasted for a whole week, leaving over 100 vessels with nowhere to go, and caused a trade loss of millions of dollars. It was just chaos. And this year was actually the latest the St. Lawrence Seaway closed for the winter. The St. Lawrence Seaway closed on January 5th this year. This was because both upstate New York and southeastern Ontario had unusually warm weather over the holiday season and caused the Seaway to close later. March 22nd, 2024, not only is when the St. Lawrence Seaway opened, but 2024 also marks the 65th anniversary of the Seaway when it opened in 1959. Since then, and before then, the St. Lawrence Seaway has innovated, fueled the economy, and served as one of the busiest waterways in the world. It has had disasters and incidents. It has had successes and major progress, fascinating history and stories, allowed ships to sail between the Great Lakes and the Atlantic Ocean, and over the past few centuries, along with the Great Lakes, it has served as the lifeblood that keeps the American and Canadian economies alive.